Tonight on Ukraine Today. Explosive developments. Ukraine's general staff has confirmed a successful strike on the Saratov oil refinery and several other Russian military sites. Putin's autumn meltdown. The Russian dictator is threatening Ukraine and the defense forces once again. Crisis diplomacy. Why did the United States decide to push the Russian-American peace plan right now? The economics of war and support. Thanks to Ukrainian refugees, the Czech Republic earned more money than it spent on helping Ukraine. All this and more, right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Robchun and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, hit the like button and let's move on to the news. Let's start with a hot update. Ukraine's general staff has confirmed a successful strike on the Saratov oil refinery and on a number of other Russian military facilities. In particular, a drone storage site was hit in the Saki airfield in temporarily occupied Crimea. Several air defense units on the peninsula were also damaged. Ukrainian forces also attacked Russian troop concentrations and fuel depots in the temporarily occupied areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And there were explosions in Russia's Rostov region and even in Moscow. Several Russian airports switched to the carpet protocol. No takeoffs and no landings. Operators of the UAV unit of the 210th Assault Regiment stopped the enemy attempt to plant mines in the Zaporizhzhia area. The occupiers tried to shut down an FPV drone with small arms. It didn't help. Minus 2 invaders. At the current pace of advance, Russia will reach the borders of Donetsk region in August 2027. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War. More details on what's happening on the front line in the story.
Unknown drones have once again attacked the Novokuybishevsk oil refinery in Russia's Samara region, according to Russian media. According to local residents, about 10 explosions were heard. Eyewitnesses also reported seeing bright flashes in the sky. Putin is stockpiling missiles to shell Europe. This warning was delivered by U.S. Army Minister Dan Driscoll during a meeting with European diplomats in Kyiv. This was reported by the New York Times.
So is Putin shelling Europe or not? That's a very complicated question. If, for instance, yesterday Russian drones unexpectedly landed in Romania, the officials from the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania simply scratch their heads and say it was an accident. If a Kh-55 or K-55 missile flies into Polish territory, that's one of the 195s. These are missiles similar to the Kh-55 and Kh-101, which the Russians use to shell Ukraine, but the Kh-55 designation means it's a missile with a nuclear warhead. But it flew into Poland with a simulator, yes, a dummy, instead of a nuclear warhead. There was no nuclear charge there, thank God. But it's impossible to determine in flight whether there was a nuclear warhead or not. No one can do that. According to
the journalist, Driscoll mentioned the growing missile threat from Russia in the context of discussing the American peace plan. European diplomats understood this as a hint from Washington that it is necessary to achieve an end to the war in Ukraine as soon as possible. In turn, Europe is considering retaliatory actions against Russia regarding drone incursions and sabotage, reports Politico, citing sources.
Europeans are responding, but they are responding very slowly. And Europeans are taking a reactive stance. A position of reaction to those provocations, to those jabs with which Russia attacks them. But
Trump himself, however, does not seem to have a clear vision of the world to which he wants to steer Ukraine. That's why they are asking our country to sign a peace agreement without providing any security guarantees.
Well, obviously this means a change in rhetoric. In fact, both in America and I would say in Europe as well. But lately, the United States administration, at least verbally and in its official statements, has been making it very clear, quite explicitly, to its partners. To NATO, that while they are kind of NATO members, NATO is here and America is over here. It's not the same thing. Well, the Americans are forcing Europe into some kind of action.
Russia, it seems, is preparing for nuclear war. Russian scientists have developed a unified state standard for detecting areas affected by radioactive, chemical, or biological contamination. The new GOST will come into effect on February 1st, 2026. But as for his own soldiers, it seems Putin doesn't spare them at all. And just in the Zaporizhzhia direction alone, he loses 100 to 200 men a day, having changed the tactics of the occupying army's advance. Now, instead of the usual infiltration tactic of sending 2 or 3 soldiers to a single position, they send in 10 infantrymen at once, which frankly is where their existence ends. Russia has decided to change its drone tactics and has started using reusable UAVs. One of these new models is the hexacopter Night Witch. It has a payload capacity of about 20 kilograms and a flight range of 40 minutes. Another new development is the quadcopter Bulldog 13, which has a 4-kilogram payload, modular strike packages, and electronics that allow it to counter Ukrainian radio jamming systems.
Reusable UAVs of various types have been used before. The same FPV drones with drop mechanisms. This is a reusable UAV. Mavics for reconnaissance and observation, those are reusable. So, to say that some kind of game changer has appeared, I wouldn't say that. At the
same time, Ukraine signed an agreement with the United Kingdom that will allow us to produce Ukrainian interceptors there, which have proven their effectiveness in combating Shaheds. It has been announced that mass production is planned, which could reach several thousand units per month.
In the past 24 hours, Russia lost at least 1,100 personnel killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that's already 1,170,790 invaders. In addition, in the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 7 Russian tanks, 15 armored vehicles, 21 artillery systems and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. Prosecutors have confirmed that Russian forces executed 5 Ukrainian prisoners of war. Investigators established that this happened on the morning of November 27th in the Zaporizhzhia region. Also in Zaporizhzhia, the occupiers struck emergency service workers. They directed a drone at a fire rescue unit. The building and equipment were damaged. The personnel were in shelter, so no one was hurt. We now know more details about the Ukraine-United Kingdom agreement on producing interceptor drones, the Octopus UAVs. More about this crucial project for defending our skies in the next story.
Ukraine is strengthening its air defense not only at the front but also on a global scale. The United Kingdom and Ukraine have signed a historic licensing agreement for the production of Ukrainian Octopus interceptor drones, which were specifically developed to counter Russian Shaheds. As Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal emphasizes, this agreement marks a new stage in international military technical cooperation, where Ukrainian technologies form the basis for mass production by partners in the defense coalition.
There are plans for mass production of the interceptors, which could reach several thousand units per month. The manufactured equipment will be delivered to Ukraine to strengthen the protection of our skies. Denis Shmyhal, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
The Octopus project is currently in the final stage of negotiations and could be launched in the coming months. British Minister for Defense Capability and Industry Luke Pollard clarifies, the United Kingdom is preparing to produce about 2,000 interceptors per month and send them directly to Ukraine.
The United Kingdom is an outstanding leader in research, development and advanced manufacturing. That's why we can contribute what our Ukrainian friends are lacking in this regard. We must be fast and we must be first. We are starting with drones for obvious reasons. But overall, Ukraine is an important partner for us in developing the technologies needed to deter Russia and rearm Europe. Luke Pollard, Minister for Defense Capability and Industry of the United Kingdom.
For Ukraine, this agreement is not just about expanding drone production. It is an attempt to create a sustainable system to counter the mass Shahed attacks that the aggressor country launches against Ukrainian cities almost every night. The Octopus has already proven its effectiveness on the battlefield. It is compact, maneuverable and inexpensive to produce. It intercepts enemy drones in the air and provides more flexible and rapid protection than traditional air defense systems. In Ukraine, 3 manufacturers have already received the necessary technologies to produce the Octopus, and another 11 are preparing their production lines. lines. But the key factor is the international scale, with production starting in the United Kingdom. This makes it possible to move from producing dozens or hundreds to thousands of interceptor drones each month. Such a pace could, for the first time, bring the situation closer to a turning point in the drone war, where until now the numerical advantage has remained with Eritrea. At the same time, Ukraine is developing joint programs with the United States as well. There too, production is being set up for interceptor drones capable of destroying Russian strike UAVs. Washington has not specified whether this refers to the octopus, but the trend itself is clear. Partners are moving toward a model of not only supplying but also producing together.
Any military project, any project related to increasing the supply of weapons to the front, whether it's regular drones or interceptor drones for Shaheeds, they are all important for conducting a full-scale war, both in the air and on the ground. And projects of this kind, such as the collaborative joint production of the film Octopuses in England and Ukraine, are even more important for the Ukrainian side. Well, let's put it this way, they won't bring about a turning point in the war in the near future, let's be honest, but at the same time, they will be able to improve the safety of the skies for many, many cities.
At the same time, Ukraine is strengthening not only its defense front, but also its financial front. Kyiv and the International Monetary Fund have reached an agreement on a new 4-year support program worth $8.2 billion. As Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko emphasizes, these funds will help finance critically important expenditures and maintain macro-financial stability, without which neither the production of weapons nor the resilience of the defense economy is possible.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is the time to subscribe, like this video and share it, so more people can see the truth. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. The Russian dictator is having yet another meltdown. During his official visit to Kyrgyzstan, he decided to voice new threats against Ukraine and the defense forces.
Ukrainian troops will leave the territories they are holding, only then the fighting will stop. If they don't leave, then we will force them through military pressure.
As they say, his arms are too short for that punch. Moreover, Putin decided to report on the occupier's successes in Komsomolsk in the Donetsk region, except there is no such city in the Donetsk region. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky commented on Putin's threats and on the efforts to stop the Russian war. In his evening address, he said this:
Russia's war is ongoing, and we can all hear that Russia spits on the efforts of key world powers to end this war with a real, lasting peace. But whether there will be peace does not depend on Russia's threats or whatever ultimatums they voice. It depends on what conditions the world will create, so that this aggression simply cannot be continued. And it also depends on what we ourselves will do to protect our state, our people, our Ukrainian national rights. Right now, our defense of positions, our resistance on the front line, and our joint work with partners for better diplomatic positions are equally important, and everything is focused on exactly that work.
Zelensky also shared his plans for next week. According to the president, ahead are important negotiations with Ukraine's partners.
Next week will bring important negotiations not only for our delegation, but also for me personally. We are preparing solid ground for these talks. Ukraine will stand firmly on its feet. Ukraine will always stand. I thank everyone who helps us. I thank everyone who defends Ukraine as if defending themselves. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes, Mr. President. By the way, it's a logical question. Why did the United States decide to push the Russian-American peace plan right now? This is especially interesting amid the scandal around US Special Representative Steve Witkoff. It is likely connected to corruption scandals in Ukraine as well.
In the corruption scandal that erupted in Ukraine, known as Minuchgate, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance saw a window of opportunity. This was reported by The Atlantic. Allegedly, Vance believed that the Ukrainian authorities found themselves in an extremely weak position and would therefore instantly agree to the 28 points, which, as has now been confirmed, were written in Moscow. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports that the new special envoy, Dan Driscoll, who also emerged at Vance's initiative, was pushing the so-called peace plan among European diplomats with threats of extraordinary force. The Russians are prepared to unleash their might not only on the Ukrainians, He
said, look, if before Russia was making missiles on the fly and immediately firing them at Ukraine, now the Russians have a stockpile. This is clearly a Russian narrative, and it's obviously not a story coming from Ukraine. It's a story invented by the Russians and handed over as a tool specifically to negotiators close to Vance and Witkoff.
Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry announced that they do not see Europe at the negotiating table for peace in Ukraine. And as usual, Putin explained when the hostilities would end.
Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they currently occupy. Only then will the fighting stop. If they don't withdraw, we will achieve this by military means.
The Americans failed to get the peace plan on Trump's desk by Thanksgiving. But according to media reports, they haven't abandoned the idea, and supposedly they promised to consider security guarantees for Ukrainians after President Zelensky signs the document. For us, the story is unpleasant, first of all. Because after 4 years of full-scale invasion, for us this is a completely unacceptable situation. Even with 4 years of full-scale invasion, and knowing that even when there were security guarantees under the Budapest Memorandum, none of the parties that pledged to uphold them did so in the event of an attack on Ukraine. Now they're talking about an agreement without any guarantees that in 6 months, a year, or 5 years, we won't find ourselves in an even more difficult war for Ukrainian society. That's definitely not a sufficient argument. Here, the Americans, if this is true, want to push both sides, but somehow it turns out that Ukraine is being pushed much more actively. Meanwhile, after the scandal with the intercepted phone conversation between Witkoff, Dmitriev, and Ushakov, the White House is pretending that nothing happened. Donald Trump got busy pardoning a turkey. Gabel, I want to tell you that it's very important, truly important, that you're here with us, no matter what's going on around you or in your life. That's something I really want you to remember, Gabel, because your presence matters a lot, and it makes a real difference. Good. We don't want to threaten this lovely girl. Thank you very much. Great job. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Some senators are demanding that Donald fire Witkoff, who is literally suspected of working for Moscow. Some analysts believe that the leak of the phone conversations is actually a demonstration of the struggle between two sides for a place closer to Trump himself, with Vice President Vance on one side and Secretary of State Rubio on the other. By the way, the latter did not react in any way to the information about Witkoff's conversations, but only to journalists' reports that things are not so smooth and unified within the Republican camp. However, analysts believe that it is unlikely Trump will actually punish Witkoff.
Witkoff is someone from his business circle, from real estate. He also built hotels, including in New York. They're kind of from the same mold. They speak a language that is mutually understandable to each other. There isn't a drop of ideology in them. You can't spot any ideas in them anywhere at all. They both couldn't care less whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Only one thing matters: interest. I think that, as one of my well-informed interlocutors said, when Witkoff came and told Donald Trump that we have a chance to get $150 billion from Russian money for some kind of joint fund, I think Trump said, go for it, go for it. Wonderful. 150 billion. That's exactly the kind of money you don't just find lying around. This, I think, is the main point here. Trump behaves like a businessman, not like a statesman or a diplomat. He has his own interests, and he strictly follows those interests.
Very soon, American politicians will enter the race for voters' favor. Senate elections are scheduled for November of next year. Currently, the Republicans have a 3-seat advantage in this government body. Just the other day, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until recently was an ardent supporter of Donald Trump, resigned. Journalist Don Bacon has announced his intention to follow her example. This means that Donald's party risks losing its majority even before the midterm elections.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has arrived in Moscow to meet with Putin. The goal: to discuss supplies of crude oil and gas for Hungary, the peace process, and of course, complain about the hard life of a friend of the dictator. According to the media, his trip was not coordinated with NATO or EU partners. Putin's shadow fleet of tankers is pretty much ready for the scrapyard. Most of them have exhausted their service life. What does this mean for the Russian economy? More in the story.
Putin is currently losing massive amounts of billions.
I really doubt that I can actually add anything new here at this point.
Russia's shadow fleet has entered a phase of mass decommissioning. Aging tankers are being forced to sell at a discount and in the shadows. More and more old Russian tankers are reaching the end of their service life and need to be scrapped. As a result, floating scrap metal turns into real scrap, undermining the capabilities of the shadow fleet, forcing them to sell vessels falling under sanctions at a discount and look for ways to offset the losses.
The moment when Russian oil and liquefied gas are sold to end consumers is being very strictly monitored by the American side. In addition, the American side has stated that if the Russian Federation refuses to come to the negotiating table, they will impose secondary sanctions against the end consumers of Russian energy resources. This is a very serious blow to the Russian economy.
The average age of ships in the shadow fleet is 20 years. Moreover, 60% of the vessels are even older.
At the moment, the Russian side is forced to admit that the expenditure side of the Russian budget has increased by almost 3.5% of GDP. And this is evidence that there is practically no money left in the treasury of the Russian Federation. Accordingly, the ability to replenish funds through the shadow fleet's operations is now limited to a minimum.
This month, dismantling began in a Turkish port of the tanker Eagle Sea, which became known after an incident in the Gulf of Finland. A year ago, the vessel damaged several underwater cables with its anchor, and Finnish authorities discovered suspicious equipment on board.
The Russian Federation is forced to sell oil at a 40% discount. In other words, this is evidence that even end consumers understand the risks associated with the potential for sanctions from American partners. And the further actions of the Russian Federation, specifically the deliberately lowering of the price of oil on the global market, indicate that they are essentially forced to dump prices in order to retain at least a certain number of consumers of Russian energy resources.
Many ships in the shadow fleet have already exceeded their service life, so these rusty tubs won't last long before they have to be decommissioned. In 2024, 409 ships were officially scrapped.
The number of decommissioned ships will continue to increase. This pressure is additionally continuing on other countries that provide their national flags to Russian ships. It should also be noted that EU countries have imposed additional sanctions against the shadow fleet of the Russian Federation, thereby minimizing the possibility of using this loophole to replenish the Russian budget.
Russian tax revenues from oil sales are at their lowest since the start of the war. Sanctions are hitting Russia hard, and there will be even more of them.
Losses from United States sanctions have already reached approximately $100 billion so far. This is a very serious blow to the capabilities of the Russian economy and accordingly to the Russian government's ability to finance further active military operations in Ukraine.
In October, New Zealand also imposed sanctions on 65 additional vessels. And recently, Canada also expanded its own restrictions. Another 100 vessels from the Russian shadow fleet were added to the list.
Finally, the economics of war and support. Thanks to Ukrainian refugees, the Czech Republic earned more than it invested in helping Ukraine. This was stated by Prime Minister Petr Fiala, who is resigning. Taking into account all of Prague's expenses for supporting Kiev, tax revenues and other payments from Ukrainians, plus EU compensations for transferring weapons and equipment to Ukraine, the net profit is 720 million euros. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.